agreed to look for them. Um, and a quick note on language, I call my adoptive parents mom and dad, or my parents, and I call my original parents first mom or first mother, first dad or first father or first parents, and occasionally birth dad or birth mom. So my slides are not working already. And now they are, because I have a magical human to help me with technology. So there you go, which obviously I need. Anyway, so I grew up an only child in an art-filled, expression welcoming environment. I am the child of an interfaith couple, a Jewish lawyer, writer, dad, and a Catholic former medical secretary and retail specialist, and now visual artist mom. My parents read to me, played a rich tapestry of storytelling records to me, invited me to paint and make things, and filled my room with a menagerie of figurines, pewter animals, and furry creatures, which more widely would be known as stuffed animals, but in my home we called them woofies. Each and every one had a name and a personality and a backstory, so I was never alone. Before I could even read or write myself, I would tell stories to my parents and they would write them down. I had a book made of construction paper and they would record straight into the construction paper. And later on, I would go back and illustrate the stories. They took dictation at all times of the day and even night, because I had a lot of stories to tell. And I even remember my mom sitting on a closed toilet seat while taking down a story from me while I was in the bathtub. So that's how I began as a writer before I could even write. There is something about the urgency of telling these pre-literate, for me, stories that resonates with me as an adoptee phenomenon. Growing up with a past ancestry that is primarily unknown while recording these stories that were in my head, creating visual art to accompany them, feels like an attempt to start laying down a track, a narrative, something to refer to that had to be created from scratch in the absence of information. I had to make it up and get it down in a 3-year-old attempt to lay claim to my very existence. Without that urgency, I doubt that books of these stories would have been created. And so I have to say kudos to my parents for supporting and enabling this and giving me that piece of groundedness, like as this 3-year-old over storytelling child. While my woofies all had elaborate backstories, I wasn't consciously aware that mine was missing. My dad created an origin story for me, which was, like so many are, adoptive, parent-centered, and from that particular perspective. This is what I call my stork story. My slides are not agreeing with me today. Okay, I don't know how that magic hand comes in and does it when mine can't, but everyone should have a magic hand in their life. So, uh, this is the story of like where I came from, how I arrived as created by my dad. And it doesn't start with my parents meeting, at my conception, at the pregnancy, at the birth, or even the relinquishment. It starts at the adoption. This is really dad's narrative, and this is how it goes. My parents go to the adoption agency to pick me up. They don't say if they want a boy or a girl baby, but dad secretly wanted a girl. And the lady at the agency goes and gets me and says, "This is Benny." My parents scoop me out of the adoption lady's hands and tells them and takes me into theirs, and they take me home. John and Eddie, the doorman at our apartment building, are surprised at my arrival because my mom wasn't pregnant, and they all laugh with joy, and I'm theirs forever. For many reasons, not the least being that both of my parents had 2 life-threatening illnesses, apiece when I was a teenager. It would be decades before I ever searched for my first parents, for my original family, and for my origins. But even though an adopted person may not look like they're searching, they are always and forever searching. I've heard adopted parents say that their kids didn't bring up adoption before, and they didn't think they were thinking about it. But trust me, we are, even if we don't speak up about it. Oftentimes, it's too scary to bring up. It's too risky to break the facade, the delicate balance that makes us part of our families. It is too easy to imagine being returned to the baby store. As a result of these high stakes circumstances, we are thrust into silence, sometimes not even daring to have these scary, doubting, probing, essential thoughts inhabit our own minds, or to even acknowledge them. So with this in mind, I'm going to, with you, take a look back at my early writing to see if adoption questioning and exploration turned up. And I'm just spoilering this right now and saying that as it turns out, oh, did it ever? Magic hand. Oh, he gave me the secret, but I'll tell you later. All right. Fantasy, it's not an escape from our world, but an invitation to go deeper into it. And when we go deeper into it, we can build something that is truly amazing. That is a quote from Andrew Slack. Okay, so this is going to be my childhood books and stories, and we are then going to go to my adult plays and productions. So just so you know where we're going, because I never know where I'm going. Just like every adopted person's adopted records were destroyed in a fire or flood, some of my early creative work as a child was damaged in a flood as well. So that was like a little PTSD finding this as I was looking for this stuff, and it's damaged, and you can't see it as well. The color was much better when I was making this as a child, but you get a glimpse of this. So by the first grade, I had learned to read and write, which was good. And though I was in the put in the lowest reading group at school, I wrote my first book, and it was called Why Can't Geese Wear Shoes? And it was written and illustrated on white typewriter paper and folded in half and bound with silver rings on with a yellow paper cover and see-through plastic cover. And it was really nice at the time, but it had a lot of dialogue, and who knew that I was going to be a playwright. And my mom had to teach me punctuation for the book because we hadn't learned that in the second grade until the second grade. So I wrote the text in pencil and color coded all the punctuation as I was learning it from my mom with this Snoopy mini color pencil set that my dad had brought back from this business trip. Commas were in red, question marks were in blue, and exclamation points were in yellow. You get the picture. The story was a search story of sorts. It was a quest to find the answer to a very pressing question: why can't geese wear shoes? The main characters were two little girls, Martha and her best friend Tammy, and their pressing question was, why can't geese wear shoes? They go around and ask everyone in the neighborhood, which is kind of funny because I was this, urban kid, and somehow I had this sort of imaginary suburban existence where you could go around to the neighbors and ask questions. And I don't know how that kind of came to me, but in return, Martha and Tammy got these crazy nonsensical answers, sometimes in French, which my French Canadian mom helped me with. And the answers were completely backwards sometimes, like a sentence that all the letters were in reverse. So they got no satisfactory answers till the end of the story. It occurs to me now that this story was a metaphor for identity search. When I did a real search years later, decades later, it was far more frustrating than what these two little girls went through. But the test and the boundary that I was exploring at age 7 was, is it okay for me to ask questions, no matter how absurd and what kind of response I was going to get? I even wrote a sequel, Martha at Home. At the end of the first book, Mrs. Brown, Martha's mom, gave Martha and Tammy a gift. You know that Mrs. Brown in these books is a grown-up because there's an illustration in one of the pages where it's the corner of a page and you can see her high-heeled shoe sort of going around a corner. So she was a grown-up. And she gives Martha and Tammy these big gift boxes, and they open it up, and it's geese wearing red shoes, and all the neighbors and friends and townspeople, again, native New Yorker, where did these townspeople come from? Also surprise the girls, and they all say in the punchline, "Your geese can wear shoes." The end. I think the moral is that you can ask questions and you might not get all the answers, but at the end of the day, anything is possible. So even if you're a weird and somewhat annoying kid, your inquisitiveness is embraced and you belong. So even though I was not consciously exploring big questions about my identity and ancestry and first family, I was creating safe space to do so later, perhaps with the help and support of my mom and dad. And P.S., I did show my book to my first grade teacher, Miss Feibush. She didn't seem interested at all, and she never moved me up from the lowest reading group. And I also happened to have aced punctuation a year earlier than all my other classmates. But, you know. So in the second grade, in Miss Hubner's class, we all made books in class. And the covers were, made on cardboard with covered fabric. They were really fancy, much fancier than my homemade books. The title of my book was Creatures from an Unknown Planet. It had a bright blue cover with black and red writing and pencil illustrations with color inside. I illustrated it myself. I had been doodling these creatures previously, and that's what you're looking at now, and figuring out who they were. They were 3 different creatures. One was called Drupadiddle, the other Lung with an H on the end, and then finally Blip. And they were also, as you can see, absolutely adorable. They were piloting a spaceship to Earth, and they encountered a little human boy. Please note that this was a few years before E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and my book was from the point of view of the creatures and not the little boy. So I didn't call them aliens because that's not what they were. They were traveling by spaceship, and that's how they saw Earth and this boy, and that's how they got there. So it was clear to me later that I was coming into adoptee consciousness, when I was coming into adoptee consciousness, that as an adoptee, I truly felt like an alien. Where on earth did I come from? Are we absolutely positively sure it's Earth? Why did my story start at adoption? How is it that it seems that I was just shot put into my parents' arms? And all of this became highly suspicious. But exploring the space travel of these creatures seems natural for an 8-year-old adopted person. And they were 3 different creatures, very visually different, as you can see, and not necessarily the same species. So were they going to stay on Earth or keep looking for their original home? We don't get the answer to that. The biggest adoptee tell in the story to me is that they were not just from any planet, but from an unknown planet. By the 3rd grade, I had returned to home production as we weren't making books in class, and I had already tangled with the powers that be in the art department of my progressive liberal arts elementary school. Not only did I think their Milton Bradley color wheels were rudimentary and complete poppycock, but when I made a painting of a lion sitting like a dog behind a dog bowl with the words lion on it, Mrs. Vandermeer told me that I wasn't allowed to use letters and numbers in my paintings. Criticism can be extra high stakes for a little adopted person when getting returned to the baby store seems like a possibility. See, I almost said Freudian slip. Positivity lurking at the edges, or at any age or any kind of transgression. But to be shamed and censored for my creative work had a high impact on me. I came home crying to my mom, and she pulled out all of these art books from her shelf. And they were books that were all artists who used all letters and numbers in their work, and that was their entire body of work. And she basically was telling me, you can create anything you want, and don't let these silly people tell you what to do, because you can express anything you see. The next year, at age 9, I started making books that were tiny 5-ring binders, blue, black, brown, sheets of paper that were blank for illustrations, but lined for writing. And there were far fewer illustrations than in the past. That could have had to do with Mrs. Vandermeer. I don't know. I'm not going to point fingers. But the first book was in this format, was about this little girl who encounters an egg that pops out of the toilet bowl in her New York City apartment. The egg cracks open and turns out to be a baby alligator. Thankfully, a very friendly one, and she hides this alligator as her pet. The book is called The Gutter Gator, and in it, the gutter gator's human child friend sees it grow bigger and bigger until this is obviously an untenable situation and unsustainable. So the gutter gator, who is called Gabe, we decide has to be returned to from, I don't know, back to where he came from, but we don't really know exactly where that is. So she has to flush him back down the toilet so that he can like live in the New York City sewer system, at least be in water where he sort of somehow belongs. So this one actually seems a little darker to me, like a little bit of an anxiety adoptee fever dream. I don't know. But the gutter gator is displaced from his natural environment, and there's a shelf life for living in hiding with his new human family. It was all hunky-dory when he was a cute little baby gator, but then when he hits adolescent and adult gatorhood, he could not continue to live with his human family. If an adoptee grows up, do they grow out of acceptability? Again, the fear of not belonging with an adoptive family and not fitting in and not being able to survive outside the waters of the original family which is like oxygen in this story. The fear and acknowledgement that the gutter gator perhaps has never truly belonged with this family, his family. And he appears out of nowhere and literally gets flushed down the toilet. So to me, this reflects the adopted person's lifelong struggle with self-worth, and what is internally generated is hard to overcome. So the mystery and uncertainty of the gutter gator's origins, and even how and why he got to this New York City apartment and this family, is palpable. The sheer randomness by which he arrives and departs are dramatic and unexplored here, just bookmarked, because an adopted person is required to just accept their odd and senseless given circumstances. My 9-year-old self made these circumstances a toilet, which I think speaks volumes. To have a clue about what an adopted person is thinking or wondering, you have to listen not only to what they say, but also what they don't say. So then I started this series of books called Fran and Nan. And Fran and Nan are these two old ladies who live in New York. I hatched this as a series. You can see in this this is like an entire, very ambitious series of stories or books. And I was planning all of them. Fran and Nan are friends, Fran and Nan together. I actually wrote and published only 2 of them. So Fran and Nan, there's like a taller one and a one with glasses. So Nan was the one with glasses. Fran was the taller one. And Bloomingdale's had just opened up their 6th floor houseware section that was just overflowing with product, very exciting. And Fran and Nan went on a shopping excursion there, as I did with my mom. And there's really like seemingly little adoption angst in this story, more of a fun romp with these zany ladies, but they don't really they have family. And you can see in the middle shot here, that's Fran's family, but they're also very isolated as just the 2 of them in their sort of like chosen old lady family in New York. So there's this sort of biological unconnectedness and this clinging to each other in their older years. So to me, there's something resonant about that with like genetic isolation. And it's as if an adopted person, little me, could not imagine these old ladies connected to like a biogenetic web of ancestry. They were just like on the streets, wandering in Bloomingdale's, isolated and alone, just having each other. And I think that's like, and this is the underbelly of the story, because it was fun times hanging out with them. Maybe a little scary in the next story, because they go to Devil's Island, and they're on this deserted island with this crazy devil character, and he has like long fur that's red, and he's running after them and chasing them. So what starts as this fun getaway becomes a nightmare, which is sometimes how we experience adoption, maybe. But this reflects the experience of growing up in a closed adoption to me, isolated from biology, ancestry, and original family. And in Fran and Nan, I wrote to that isolation. I tried to sugarcoat it, but it was also there. And there's no presence of ghost figures or acknowledgement of what's missing, but clearly deny it at your own peril. So at age 10, fifth grade, my parents had an old gray and white Brother electric typewriter, and I was writing stories and focusing more on the words and the illustrations. So it was a natural next step to graduate to composing on the typewriter. And even though I was hunting and pecking at the beginning, it helped me keep up with the speed of thought, or at least to try to. The name of the series was Kathy the Kangaroo. And this was like a flood situation. So that's not my illustration. That's just an illustration that makes sense, as I will tell you. But Kathy was spelled with a K, and she was an Australian transplant to the United States, who worked naturally at a daycare center with little humans in Pittsburgh, PA. And so just as I had like so many conflicts with my aforementioned art teacher, Mrs. Vandermeer, Kathy the Kangaroo had many conflicts with her boss, who was short and stout, and definitely resembled the boss on the Flintstones and the Jetsons, if you remember them. I don't know how that influence came to be, but it did. And it must be, I have to say that my babysitter, beloved babysitter when I was growing up, was named Kathy, but Kathy with a C. And they were both endlessly wise and patient and wonderful. But Kathy the Kangaroo had a lot of conflict, so she was a good person or a good kangaroo to write about, because she was a fish out of water, transplanted across both continents and species. She's the only human in the series who functions in the human world, and who is a kangaroo working a human job and having no, basically having to pass as a human. So adoptees are often in this passing situation in their families and communities. But I think that's how she resonated to me, coming back to her now as an adoptee. But these stories and many others had the grace of being published in our fifth grade class's publication. Our teacher, Dr. Sussman, loved owls, so naturally it was called the Wise Owl Weekly, and it was published on 8.5 by 11 mimeographed paper. The longest of the Kathy the Kangaroo stories was Kathy the Kangaroo Goes to the Zoo, which had Kathy taking her entire daycare of little humans on an expedition to the Pittsburgh Zoo. And this was like a 34-page story. So I had to like type it out. I had a lot to say, obviously, but I think this was a very awkward situation, because all the little humans were surrounding her as they were looking at caged animals. And I was focused on finishing. So I actually stayed home for 2 days, sick, so I could finish the story. I think my parents knew I was not sick, but sick. And so I finally finished this epic story. And in it, we can really see like that she has all this responsibility to please people, and she also feels homesick for family and friends of kangaroos in Australia, who are just like very much in the distance of this story. And this is at a time where, I was told I only have one set of parents, one family, which is what adoption industry said at that point. And that's what I had been communicated to, and my parents had gotten that message from Louise Wise. It's as if she was born to you, exactly the same as if she was. So there's nothing in the story that is missing from Kathy's life that is acknowledged, but you feel it in the story. You feel a longing in this story on the edges of it, or else I don't think little me would have stayed homesick to finish the story. There was something I was exploring that was like I was chasing what was on the edges of this. So slides are not my friend today. All right. So, and actually that is a perfect segue into this, which is machines are perfect, perfect, perfect. This was a graphic novella I did at age 11. I have no memory of writing this. I found this when I was doing this presentation. And it's this post-apocalyptic story of a man who is trying to build things in a quarry, again, totally isolated and alone. And then a machine comes along who can do everything perfectly. So the second I saw the title, it immediately hit me as adoption resonant. The tyranny of being perfect plagues me and so many adoptees that I know. It's the life or death urgency that is like so palpable in the story. The stakes of attaining perfection, they're so high. And if we are not perfect, we can be returned. We can be sent back to the baby store. So no matter how old you are. In reference to my 11-year-old self writing, machines are perfect, perfect, perfect. Like I felt those sorts of fears as recently as a few months ago of being sent back to the baby store. And I have grappled and lost many times over with this sort of tyranny of perfectionism. Even working on this presentation, I feel the tyranny of perfectionism. And I'm glad that I don't have to attain it, and I'm glad I'm in a community that gets that. So so I can take a little breath in there. But 11-year-old me got it way before I consciously got it as like an adopted person or as a person going through life. So getting this was really just like this interesting slap in the face of like, oh, you always get these things that you might not quite get with your whole self until you're ready. So that was one of those things. So that's what that is. So we had electives in the 6th grade, and I took a short story class with Mr. Kushian, who taught us history, and we read the very best stories, like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, and then we had to write our own. So I wrote this story, and this is like from a Crate and Barrel catalog, but I just, this was like this was a destroyed in the floods story, so I don't have a visual for it, but this makes sense. So anyway, in this story, which is nothing is what it seems, this girl has like unknowingly takes LSD from this punch bowl at a party. So and finds out that nothing is really as it seems. So in adoption land, you can just substitute adoptee consciousness for LSD, and there it is. But in this story, it's really sort of about being in some kind of fog and coming out of it and realizing how things really are, like having this big eye-opening moment. So again, the protagonist here is like isolated and alone. Like that is a big theme that smacked me in the face again, like looking at this work that I did as a child. And she's in a group, but she's apart from the group, and she's this truth teller and truth seer. And sort of no one wants to hear, she's a town crier. No one wants to hear her truth. So the LSD angle, if you're wondering, was inspired by the book that like every 11-year-old at the time was reading, which was called Go Ask Alice, which was this black, very dramatic paperback. There was LSD in a punch bowl in there too, and Anonymous was listed as its author. So I stole from anonymous. You always steal from the best. So at the end of our collectives, we all gathered in ceremonial hall and we shared our projects together. And Mr. Kushian chose me to represent our elective, our short story elective. So I read the story, and there was this illustration of the girl at the party, the punch bowl, the whole thing. And our principal, Mr. Shedland, whose office was covered with rainbows, he was very genuine, not, and he was horrified by the contents of my story, and he tried to whisk me off stage while I was reading it. And Mr. Kushian, it was very dramatic, and Mr. Kushian sort of like interfered and came to my rescue, and she was like, "Let her finish, let Susie finish reading the story," and it was quite dramatic. So she later explained to me that this was a good lesson, that if people have big reactions to your work, like Principal Shedlin had to mind that even if it's negative, like his was, it means you're doing something right. So sixth grade, Miss Hume, my sixth grade English teacher, had us write fictional autobiographies. So this was part nonfiction and part fiction, because we were supposed to like finish our lives. So easy assignment. So you had to project the whole rest of it and make it into a nice story. And as we learned from the last story, I'm not into nice stories. That's not something I do. So uh, so I was named after my Aunt Sue, who is my dad's sister, and she died by suicide 2 years before I was born. And I very lovingly became her namesake, or she became my namesake. So in my autobiography, I was having trouble thinking about my life going past the time that she passed away. So um, so I wrote this very dramatic climax in my autobiography, where at Sue's age, at Aunt Sue's age, I'm doing this like rock climbing thing, and I have this seizure because I had epileptic seizures when I was 11, and so I'd just been diagnosed with epilepsy, and I was rock climbing. I have a seizure, and I fall, not to my death, but the doctor later, examines me, and he's like, "Well, it's a good thing that you have survived this accident, but I don't think you are aware that you are pregnant, and you've had a miscarriage because of this accident." So this was much darker than the gutter gator, this story, I would say. And this was my autobiography. And when you do that as, an 11-year-old, you get a see me after class. You get one of the red see me's after class, because this was very disturbing for them, for Ms. Hume, who liked nice stories. And it, I think she was just covering her ass, honestly, but I got into trouble for writing this dark tale. And I think that the accident, and I think it was taken that writing this accident, I might have had some kind of suicidality, and I actually did not at the time. I think it was actually more the limitations of my given circumstances, of being uprooted, of not knowing my roots and not being able to see branches because of that. And actually, I think it was me processing that I had these seizures and claiming them, like, oh, I could have seizures later, and actually being responsible and an adult, and in my creative work processing through that. And I mean, I'm happy to report that I did not have a rock climbing accident or miscarriage at age 39. It was not a predictive piece, but I think it was an important piece for me to claim that there is that darkness that can lurk, and that you have the opportunity to navigate around it, but you have to see it. in order to navigate around it. So guess what? We're out of this like dark child zone. I'm happy to say, and we're into adult plays and productions now. So I was in college. So I'm fast forwarding from 6th grade to first year of college. I went to Oberlin College, so we called ourselves first year students instead of freshmen because that's sexist. And I was part of the feminist theater collective, and we did an ambitious theater piece called Creation Myths. So this is my callback. So even though I was a writer, not an actor, I had to perform this piece, and I wrote it, and it was terrifying and empowering both. So I wrote a piece about my adoption, reclaiming my stork story, and rewriting the one that I grew up hearing my dad tell, but embracing the pieces of it that were beginning to seep in the edges. So it was almost sci-fi, this piece. It was like cold and antiseptic, and my parents come to the adoption agency to get me. And it's like this big box store and with a plexiglass window and an oval opening, with the adoption agency worker like shoving babies like through this like plexiglass opening in the window. And there's, desks and paperwork, and there's this huge cash register. And I didn't realize until I looked at this piece again that I was fully conscious of being bought as a baby, when I was 19. And I didn't realize that I had knowledge of that, because there's this massive cash register in this piece. And it doesn't say how much I was or anything, but it was a visual in it that was hard to look away from. So, and it was very clinical and sterile. Everyone working there were like called white coats, and there was this really chilling effect of it. And I didn't fit through the opening in the plexiglass window, so I had to be brought around the side in this. And like I wasn't so much the cutest little baby in the adoption center. I wasn't so much, it wasn't the story of me being wanted. It wasn't rainbows and unicorn story. It was like the flip side of that. And it was really an exploration too of just how awkward and clumsy and unnatural the entire proceedings were. It's just a very uncomfortable story. And my parents in it are very uncomfortable negotiating the proceedings of getting me. And this was not how people were accustomed to hearing about adoption. So I think I didn't know that I was flipping the script at the time. I didn't know that I was, it's just sort of that sort of thing where, when you're like ignorance is bliss. I didn't know that I was going up against the powers that be in the adoption industry's dominant narrative of, rainbows and unicorns adoption. But I certainly had flipped it on its head. And it was within the context of a larger piece with other stories of creation myths. There were Greek myths, and there were all these other myths of, which sort of landed. It's like somehow I got to tell the adoption one, and it was the different narrative. So there was something empowering about that, particularly even now looking back on it, because I didn't know that I had achieved that. So in drama school, I was 26 years old, and I was studying with my mentor, the late great Romulus Linney, at the Actors Studio Drama School in New York City. And I wrote this play called Birthday, and that name I think should resonate with the adoptees here, and the people who love them, as something, loaded. So at the time, I felt that adoption was something taboo to even explore. And I was really I was definitely pre-adoptee consciousness, and flat out, like I had no interest in searching. I was defensive about it. So why would I ever want to do that? So because because it was so laid out by the culture and not so much by my parents. But, if you search, you're betraying your adoptive parents and you're compromising your identity, and that you work so hard to construct. And this missing information is not even acknowledged as such. It's just like everything's fine. And it was a little bit like the lady doth protest too much. Everything's fine. So I somehow, in the midst of all of that, wrote this play, Birthday. And it takes place on Alexandra's 30th birthday. And she is, I was 26 at the time, so I was 4 years away from that. But she's alone in her New York City apartment. And again, the relentless theme of isolation again. And she's sitting on her couch drinking scotch, smoking a cigarette, neither of which I do in real life. And she is staring at this chocolate cake, which you can see with candles in it. So she goes to the kitchen and grabs this huge cleaver, and she takes a blade to her wrist, brings the cleaver to the coffee table. She lights the candles with her gold Zippo lighter, and she sings happy birthday to herself. And as her eyes are closed and she's doing this, the woman on the right side of the screen comes in dressed in his hippie garb, and she grabs a cleaver out of Alexandra's hand. She puts the cigarette in her scotch glass and puts it out. And when Alexandra, very shocked, asks who she is, she says, "I'm your mother." So it turns out that Alexandra had wished for her mom, her adoptive mom, who had died of cancer, and this is her first birthday without her. And instead of her mom, she gets her mother, the woman who relinquished her 30 years before. And mother is a 52-year-old, really phantom figment, because she appears in her 22-year-old body, which is and as her 22-year-old self with hippie garb, which is the age that she was at the time of Alexandra's birth. So she's quite meddlesome because she's still her 52-year-old self, and she's quite meddlesome and judgmental and interfering, and there's a lot of conflict. But she's from Alexandra's imagination, obviously, and Alexandra has to grapple with her, and I had to grapple with her. So in this production shot, actually, mother is checking out her 22-year-old ass and grateful to be reunited with it. But a few things, three. So one is, like, when I first wrote this, I hadn't consciously realized, what I had created at all. And when we were finished reading it in my writing class, Romulus said, "I hope everyone is aware of what we just witnessed." And I wasn't. So Romulus felt like this was a really deep dive, and he always encouraged us to draw blood, and his words. And adoption is such like a deep and has such deep and universal themes. And he basically told me, like, this is what you need to write about. Like, this is, like, you can tell us about this. And emotional. This is someone, when there's just those people who are not even, like, in the adoption constellation, who can kind of come in with this encouragement or normalizing of your stuff. And that was Romulus for me. But anyway, he talked to me in feedback about how Alexandra was suicidal in the beginning of the play. And I said, yes, of course, that's what I wrote. And I had no idea that she was suicidal in the beginning of the play. Like, I'd just written this and brought it in, and I had no idea. So, there was that strain, and I didn't know until, of course, none of us knew how pertinent, and sadly, that this is to our community. But I was able to write about it and grapple with it and help myself navigate it, which is a great gift. But there was that. And what she did in this moment, the character, was invite the mother to come in so she could deal with these things. And I guess that's what I was doing as a writer. So two in this is that my mom's friend Helen saw the play, and she said to me, "I can't believe you killed your mom." And my mom did have cancer in real life and survived cancer. So, and I was terrified of losing her. And that was one of the reasons that I had stopped myself in a search and didn't consider it, because she and my dad had both grappled with really serious illnesses. But in this play, I couldn't encounter my first mother or even a phantom or figment form of her if my mom was around in the fictional world of the play, even there. So I think the adoption industry really who did a disservice to me and my parents by insisting on this lie that there are only one set of parents for an adopted person. Um, so, you know, I had to like acknowledge that there was just this plane with these two people in it for me to kind of meet my birth mother, my mother in this play. And I wasn't ready at that time for there to be two moms. That couldn't fit into my worldview at that time. There couldn't be two moms, there could only be one mother. And it was very much either or. And there wasn't a both and landscape for me to do it, even in my own writing. So number 3 is, this is the first adoption play, like specifically, I guess, play, because the creation myth had been this one little thing, but this was the first adoption play that I wrote. And, really it was a doozy. There was so much going on for me with this. So, the really uncanny thing about Mother being a 22-year-old is that decades later, when I found my first mother, no, it's not decades, it's 14 years later. I discovered that my first mom was 22 years old when she relinquished me, and I did not know that. So somewhere I knew that. Somewhere I had to know that. And when the social worker first told me that she was 22, I really almost fell over, because it's like I had, I knew. And I really feel that adoptees, because of our circumstances, have this very particular inner knowing and hidden self-knowledge that's like trapped in your body, trapped in your cells, and that can be accessed when you are ready for it, because you're not always ready for it. So that was really the case when I opened these channels. So the other thing about this play is that the thing that most surprised me in writing this was that that Mother wanted her daughter to find her. Like, she was pissed off that she hadn't searched for her. And that really surprised me. It really, really surprised me. I'm writing both of these characters, but as I'm channeling this Mother character, she says, "Why didn't you come and look for me?" And it never occurred to me that my mother wanted to have me go look for her. There's so much protection around that. And you don't want secondary rejection and all of this stuff. But I had taken that way off the table. And then this phantom figure in my own play says to me, why aren't you searching for me? So, I really, it was really like this whole thing with closed adoption, where, the first parents to me were never, there was so only one set of parents, that the first parents were really like fruit flies who just concocted me and not actual humans. So even, having Felicia Scarangello, who played the mother, physically embody this person on stage was like the first drop of saying to me, this person exists. You have two sets of parents. And there was also a moment where Felicia was playing my mother, and my mother came to see my play, and my mom came to see my play and was in the audience. So I think self-consciously, I just started to just just rip away at some of the edges of this, of what I had been asked to accept as the situation of an adopted person. And in writing my own version of it, I got to explore something else and discover something else. So, and it was, I don't think I could have done that. I couldn't do that in real life, but I could do that within the context of the play and start to carve that psychic space out for myself so that I could then later bring that into reality. When I was 27, I did a sassy adult adaptation of Alice Through the Looking Glass, which is Lewis Carroll's book, Through the Looking Glass. And I did it with all adoption themes, and it's not that on the nose, but I was consciously doing that. So there were all these themes of identity, parentage, and belonging. And Alice is a character who's like really isolated again, but that was Lewis Carroll's first thing. I didn't make that up. But she's navigating this like giant chessboard all on her own and encountering many different characters who snub her. In my version, she's this young woman who is stuck in Disney World, and basically in the American Disney Technicolor version of Alice in Wonderland, like the movie in the 50s. And there she has to be this blonde girl and be an American. And as it turns out, she's a British brunette woman who is grown up and has been there trapped for all this time, but Mickey won't acknowledge her true identity. And Mickey is sort of like Mickey Mouse is sort of like her brother in Disney World. And Bob Iger, who ran Disney at the time, was like the paternal offstage corporate person. So later in the show, she discovers like this other layer in her identity, and she becomes Alice Liddell, the girl who Lewis Carroll told stories to, and whom he based the Alice character on. And she was actually brunette. And the Carroll character becomes a more self-conscious, awkward, stuttering version of himself called Charles Dodgson, which is the real man. That was Carroll. Carroll was like Lewis Carroll's pen name. So in the play, Alice considers Dodgson Carroll and Sir Alfred Tennyson, who created the gorgeous illustrations, one seen here, for the books and in this picture, to be her fathers. So there's like I'm sort of examining multiple father layers and layers of identity. And Alice is searching for all of that and going through the play. And I think the Red Queen and the White Queen seen here are definitely maternal characters. And so in this, there is specifically two fathers and two mothers, undeniably. And, this is just something I had not acknowledged in life. And there they were populating the stage in front of me as we were doing this production. So, I actually don't know exactly when I realized it was an adoption play, but the themes were fairly clear. I understood the identity. And I think a couple years later, I said, ooh, it's an adoption play. Icons and Outcasts was an experimental play where I took a group of 8 actors and I did a 6-month collaborative development process with them that resulted in a 90-minute play that ended up transferring theaters and running for 6 months and was a surprise cult hit in New York City. And the adoption part of it is more around identity, because these were 8 unique characters who collide one fateful day in Chelsea. But there's a duality to each of these characters, because I really made each character for each actor. And so they play themselves in part of the play, and then they play their crazy characters. And their crazy characters were sort of against type. So the good girl, played by the sweet blonde Liz, who's crouching in the picture, she was actually playing as a character Jennifer Monroe, who believed she was the evil twin sister of Jill Monroe from Charlie's Angels. And the super smart, edgy gay man, John, who's on the left, got to play this super dumb ass character called Arkansas Jack. So each character had this duality, and although I didn't realize it at the time, I think I was sort of just kind of getting that that I had that duality as an adoptee, that I had these two different things, these two different identities, these two different strands. And I was exploring them, on stage with these characters in front of me, and really marking them out, even though I wasn't claiming them for myself. I was only Suzanne Bachner. I didn't have a duality identity at that point, or really awareness of that. But somewhere I did. And I think that's how it comes out. And the other thing about this play was that it was a long process, and it really was like a way of creating a theater family of connection and belonging. And I think that was really the first experience I had or sought out, that was similar to an adoptee collective or an adoptee group, where you are accepted, embraced, and understood. And that was a way, that was the way I could do it with a theater family before I could do it with my family of adoptees and even adoption constellation. So that was that first way of having that belonging in that group that's outside the family. It's your chosen family. Twin studies. This was a play that I wrote about twins with Liz Sullivan, and I wrote two of the plays. She wrote two of the plays. I had the glue play, and the glue play was actually about an evil twin study that was just a little bit like the Louise Wise twin studies that I just didn't realize. And so the striking woman in the middle of the photo in the lab coat is playing these two twins, and there's an offstage character who's like the scientist who is, these two twins don't know about each other, and he's doing these examinations of them. So I mean, like, I don't know how I unconsciously knew that Louise Wise had done these, horribly atrocious twin studies and wrote a play about it before knowing it, but I did. So I have to do my time because I think I've been babbling on for what, am I good with time?
3:50. 3:50.
Oh my God. So, oh no, I am good with time. I'm okay with time, right? All right. So Benny, this was a play that I wrote where I was doing these memoir writings, just like privately. And there we go. Never check the clock. I was doing these memoir plays, and I just finally had the because I'd done another collective of actors, and I just sort of got the guts to bring out these memoir pieces that I was writing privately, and I would write them with my different names, Sue, Susie, Suzanne, because I was actually not changing the names of the characters of me. I was saying this is my memoir. This happened. So I was doing this, and I got together with this group, and the play was called We Call Her Benny. We did it twice, and these are the two different casts of these plays, but some of the casts are similar, some of the cast members. But the play was about adoption and sexual abuse and bipolar disorder, bisexuality, betrayal, and belonging, a lot of B's. And I hadn't I knew that my name in foster care, it had come up earlier, was Benny with an IE, but I hadn't seen that paperwork in so long that I remembered it as Benny, which is, you would think this is a more normal name, the spelling of Benny. So the play was called We Call Her Benny, Benny. But here it was. So the show focused on me-ish, the character as a teenager in her early 30s. So I had two actors named Anna, and they're in the middle in the bed in both of these pictures. So one was a teenager, one was in her 30s. And because I had these two Anna actors who I cast in that, I changed the name to Anna. So they were the two Annas instead of Susie, Suzanne. But I costumed them in red, and and the ensemble was like in charcoal gray around them. But here again is like this sort of twin idea, or the twinning with the Annas, even though they're actually two, they're the same person, just at different ages, but there is a twinness about them. And I think just the nurture nature obsession of our culture has always like led people to focus on, adoption and twins. So there's that connection for me has always been between twins and adoption, regarding that. And so I kind of had both with this because there was a twinness to them. But the Anna who was like the ensemble was around them, and the Anna who was not in the scene was watching the scene the whole time. So they would watch each other in the scenes that they were not in with each other. So my slides are not working again. I have my magic hand coming in, but you can't see. Oh, you can see a little of them. Okay. So this is what the play looked, where the other Anna would be watching the older Anna was watching the younger Anna in these pictures. But I also had the adoption constellation, who was vividly portrayed, and my mom was called Judy, the birth mom, and the dad was Dad, and that's Anna in the middle. And my actual actor who was playing the birth mom was also an in the fog adoptee like myself. So there was just this sort of limitation between how I could portray this, because I was still like pre-adoptee consciousness. And I had this sort of obsession with a very controlling mother figure. It was my now thankfully ex-boyfriend's mom, who was actually a birth mom, and she was very controlling and crazy with me. And so I actually established this character as this birth mom in this play. And I realized at a certain point that she was my like sort of nightmare version of a birth mom. So this was like my worst case scenario terror version of a birth mom. And it was like there were only that they were the only people who could be there. There was no other. Again, there was only two parents. I go back to only two parents are allowed in this thing. And I am going a little over. I am going a little over because I want to take questions. But all right. So I did so much faster pre this. So I'm going to skip through Brilliant Mistake. This is Brilliant Mistake ensemble. This is like search and reunion comedy adventure that I wrote as a thing. And then we get to The Good Adoptee. So The Good Adoptee, many of you know. I'm going to show you the slides, but many of you know The Good Adoptee. And if you don't know The Good Adoptee, I'm actually offering a special AKA discount code to see it, which is AKA rocks, but I'll tell you that in the end. This is me actually reading The Good Adoptee, and this is my first mother, Rusty, and me at the Cub retreat. So I just want to stop on this. And this is after I did the play, I read the play, and she came and did a Q&A with me. And this was the first time that she'd ever seen my work. And this was the first time she had ever been in community with like adoption constellation people. And so it was really remarkable. And that's why I'm stopping at. This was Seattle. We went to Seattle with the show. we've done legislative work. We got the bill passed in New York. We did this last year with Adoptees United and NIARC and Adoption Mosaic, or 2 years ago. And then we just did Fog Lift. There we go. So I'm going to just wrap up to say that what I learned myself from doing this was that adoptees are always searching, whether consciously or unconsciously, but to me, I realize that it's this web that is in constant motion, even, however privately or publicly it's happening. And even like the littlest of adoptees, even pre-literate little me was searching at age 3 before I could even read or write. And that's, so I'm just saying, the more you can listen to little or big adoptees as they tell their stories in any way, the more helpful it is, because it allows us to listen to ourselves in a deeper way. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Do we want to stop the recording?